Hey there, deep diver. Get ready, because today we're going to dive deep, and I mean deep, into the world of longevity technology.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
We're talking about pushing the boundaries of the human lifespan. We're talking like gene editing, stem cells, maybe even hitting pause with that cryonic stuff.
The stuff science fiction dreams are made of.
Right. You sent us a ton of research and articles on this, and it seems like you're really wrestling with this question I bet everyone's thinking about. Like, if we crack this whole longevity code, are we creating a world where only rich people get to live forever?
Well, it's a question we have to be asking right now, while all of this is still being developed, right? We don't want to wait until it's too late. We've got to think about the impact this tech will have on society now, or we risk making inequality even worse.
It's not just about tacking years onto our lives. It's about making those years mean something. Right?
Exactly.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, maybe we should take a step back and define what we even mean by longevity tech in the first place.
It's a good point. People hear longevity and they think fountain of youth, but it's so much bigger than that.
Way bigger.
Think of it like this. Imagine you could be 100 years old, but you feel as good as you did at 30. That's what this tech is aiming for, targeting what actually causes aging, not just slapping a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some of the ways they're doing that?
One of the really exciting areas is gene editing. Scientists are figuring out how to repair damaged DNA, which could mean slowing down or even reversing aging at the cellular level.
Okay, I'm picturing scientists hunched over in a lab somewhere, like literally cutting and pasting strands of DNA.
You're not too far off. They're using tools like CRISPR to make super precise changes to DNA sequences so they can go in and correct those tiny genetic defects that lead to age-related diseases.
So we're really talking about like rewriting our genetic destinies here. This isn't just sci-fi anymore.
It's getting closer all the time, and that's what makes this such a pivotal moment. Of course, gene editing is only part of the puzzle. Another really promising area is stem cell research.
Stem cells, right? Always hear about how important those are, but I'll be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Sure, think of stem cells kind of like the body's raw materials, blank slates that can turn into any type of cell in the body.
Ah, okay, so they're like those Lego blocks that can become literally anything depending on what you build with them.
Exactly. And scientists think that if we can really harness the power of stem cells, we might be able to regenerate damaged tissues and organs, hit the refresh button on aging, so to speak.
Okay, so instead of replacing a worn-out heart, we can maybe use stem cells to just like repair the one you've got. That's incredible. But I have to imagine, like any kind of cutting-edge tech, this stuff doesn't come cheap.
You're absolutely right. The unfortunate reality is that a lot of these life-extending treatments are really, really expensive.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Like, we're talking treatments that could cost millions of dollars, which puts them totally out of reach for most people.
Right, and that's where that whole inequality issue comes back into play. It's like we're creating a world where the wealthy are not only living longer, they're practically becoming a different class of human.
It's a scary thought, and it goes beyond individual lifespans. Imagine the impact on society as a whole. Politicians staying in power for centuries, tech CEOs becoming these untouchable figures, running corporations for generations.
And what does that do to progress if you've got the same people calling the shots for, like, decades? Wouldn't that stifle innovation? Where would the fresh ideas come from?
Exactly. We could end up in a world where power is even more concentrated in the hands of a few, which would be, well, a recipe for disaster. It's the
Yeah.
classic story of the rich getting richer, but this time it's not just about money, it's about time itself.
And even if these treatments do become more affordable down the road, wouldn't the early adopters, the ultra-rich, still have a massive advantage?
That's a huge concern, yeah. I mean, imagine a world where the top 1% have had potentially centuries to build their wealth, their knowledge, their networks.
And all while everyone else is aging at the regular depressing rate.
It's a recipe for a level of inequality that we've never even seen before. It's almost like we're standing on a fault line just waiting for the big one to hit.
And we have no idea what the aftershocks will look like.
Exactly. But I do think it's important to remember, we've got to stay optimistic here. Technology is a tool.
Right.
And like with any tool, you can use it to build amazing things, or you can, use it for not so great things.
Okay, so you're saying instead of freaking out about some dystopian future, we should be focusing on how to use this technology for good.
That's the million-dollar question, right? But I think there's reason to be hopeful. First off, we're having this conversation now while these technologies are still being developed. That gives us a chance to get ahead of the curve, to anticipate the problems, and maybe even head them off at the path.
Okay, so instead of asking, what if things go wrong, we start asking, how can we make sure they go right?
Exactly. And a big part of that is recognizing that this isn't just a scientific or technological challenge, it's a social and ethical one, too. We need to be talking about access, affordability, regulation, all of that from day one.
So no more this move fast and break things mentality we've seen in tech.
Nope. This time, we need to be a lot more careful, a lot more thoughtful about the long-term consequences of what we're building. And that means bringing ethicists, policymakers, and everyday people into the conversation from the very beginning.
So it's about making sure we don't lose sight of our humanity in this quest for longer lives, right?
Yeah.
But let's not get too doom and gloom here. You've talked about the potential downsides of all this, but what about the good stuff? What are the possibilities if we get this right? What if people could live significantly longer?
Imagine a world where the best and brightest minds in science and art in every field had decades, maybe even centuries, to work on the big problems.
So instead of fearing a future with these immortal tech CEOs, we could be entering a golden age of human achievement.
It's not out of the question. Just think, what if someone like, say, Jennifer Doudna, the CRISPR pioneer, had another 50 or 100 years to keep doing research?
Whoa.
What kind of incredible breakthroughs could we see then? Could we wipe out cancer, Alzheimer's? Could we cure aging itself?
Okay, now that's a future I can get behind. It's like that longevity dividend you mentioned earlier. But how do we make sure everybody benefits, not just a select few?
That's where things get really interesting. We need to start thinking outside the box about how to use all this extra time for the greater good. Maybe we set up mentorship programs, connect those with longer lifespans to younger generations so we can share knowledge and experiences across generations.
So instead of seeing the wisdom and experience of people who live longer as a threat, as this concentration of power, we view it as a resource to be shared, right? Something that benefits everyone.
Exactly. Imagine a world where entrepreneurs are mentored by people who've seen it all, where young artists can learn from masters who have had centuries to hone their craft. Think about the possibilities.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective. But we also can't ignore the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
What about the potential for even greater inequality?
Of course not. And that's where I think this idea of a social contract for longevity comes in.
A social contract for longevity, what does that even mean?
It's a way of thinking about how we can make sure everyone benefits from these advancements, not just the wealthy. It might mean things like mandatory contributions to a global fund that supports this kind of research and makes sure everyone has access to these treatments.
Interesting. So it's like you benefit from this technology, you've got a responsibility to pay it forward so others have the same opportunity.
Precisely. And it goes beyond just money. Maybe it means committing to mentorship or public service. It's about moving away from this individualistic view of longevity and seeing it as a collective responsibility.
That's quite a shift in thinking, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to consider as we move into this uncharted territory. I mean, we're talking about potentially reshaping the very fabric of society.
No doubt about it. We're not just talking about adding a few years here or there. We're talking about fundamentally changing what it means to be human. We're talking about moving away from that every man for himself mentality. We got to start realizing, we're all in this together, right? I mean, what's the point of living longer if the world around you is falling apart, if it's full of inequality and instability?
Yeah, it's like they say, we might not all be in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm.
Right, exactly. Though in this case, we actually have a chance to maybe, build a stronger boat.
No, yeah, I like that analogy. So, okay, we're talking about potentially huge changes here.
Huge. This isn't just some minor tweak. We're talking about potentially changing what it means to be human.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it. We're wrestling with questions. Philosophers have been debating for centuries, but now it's not just hypothetical anymore, right?
Yeah, it's one thing to sit around and talk about immortality.
Right.
It's a whole other thing to actually figure out how to live in a world where it might be possible.
Totally. And honestly, for those of us who aren't philosophers or professional futurists, it can feel kind of overwhelming,
Yeah.
What does all this actually mean for the average person just trying to make sense of it all?
I get it. It's a lot to process. But here's the thing. This isn't some far-off future we're talking about. These advancements are already having an impact right now.
So we can't just sit back and wait for someone else to figure it all out.
Nope. This is on all of us. We all have a responsibility to stay informed, to talk about these issues, to support the people who are trying to make sure this technology is used for good.
So it's not just about the scientists in their labs. It's about everyone.
Everyone. The future of longevity isn't something that's just going to happen to us. It's something we're all going to create together through the choices we make, the actions we take.
It's about making sure that just living longer doesn't come at the expense of actually living a good life, a meaningful life.
Right on. And, I think that's a good place to leave it for today. We've got some big, even kind of scary challenges ahead of us, but there's also enormous potential for good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really up to us to face these challenges with open minds and brave hearts and make sure everyone benefits from a future where we might all get to live a lot longer.
It's a future where, hopefully, living longer means we all have more opportunities to learn, to love, to make a difference in the world. And hey, maybe even have a little fun along the way.
You're here.
Thanks for joining us for this incredible deep dive into the future of, well, everything. Until next time, keep those brain cells firing, and remember, the future isn't written yet. We get to write it.